Species. Unite.
Do people even want to know about some of these issues? Because I think some of the meat production concerns, it's kind of like people would rather, in some cases, I think some people might not really want to know all the nitty gritty. They don't want to know how the sausage is made. That poses an interesting question and challenge about how you communicate about some of these issues when maybe there's a resistance among a subset of people who don't want to know more.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Novogratz. This is Species Unite. We have a favor to ask. If you like today's episode and you have a spare minute, could you please rate and review Species Unite on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts? It really helps people to find the show. This is the fourth episode in a special 4-part series where we go deep into the food system with some of the brightest minds from Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future. Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future works at the intersection of diet, food production, public health, the environment, and equity. And one of the reasons that we did this series, because we're about to enter another 4 years with the Trump administration. And the Trump administration has been particularly bad for people who want to change the food system, climate-wise, health-wise, worker-wise, and of course, for the animals. This conversation is with Patti Truant Anderson. Patti is a senior program officer at the center, and part of her work has been in public opinion polling on the food system. These polls can inform decisions by our lawmakers. And the good news is we're not nearly as polarized as it might seem. It's really nice to see you, Patti. Hi.
Thanks for having me, Elizabeth.
This is our fourth episode from people from Center for a Livable Future at Johns Hopkins. By now, I would hope everybody knows what Center for a Livable Future is. So I won't make you say that, but I will have you say who you are and what you do there.
My name is Patti Truant Anderson, and I'm a faculty associate in the Department of Health Policy and Management, and also a senior program officer at the center, which is all within the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. My work at CLF really focuses on identifying and advancing evidence-based solutions to the public health and environmental challenges associated with food, and particularly how we produce food. I've always been really interested in how we communicate about public health risks and how those of us in public health can do a better job of translating the evidence and the science and talking to policymakers about what these issues really mean for people's lives and what matters to them. And so part of my work at CLF involves doing public opinion polling and about food system issues to better understand, what people are concerned about, and also gain insights on how we can better communicate in ways that take into account, those things that people do care about.
Let's talk about some of the things that you're learning or, what's coming out of these polls. Starting with food system reforms.
I think one thing that really has come through in our polls and in some of the other recent polls I've seen is that, a lot of these issues are not as politically divided as some might have you believe. I think that support for food system reforms and promotion of sustainable and healthy food systems is not polarizing, and we see high support across political divides for many of the issues that we care about. We did kind of a 2-part poll that related to a lot of issues that were pertinent to the Farm Bill debate. So the Farm Bill, of course, has not happened yet. That's been an ongoing congressional saga where they haven't gotten it done. We found 88% of people, for example, report that they say it's a very high priority for food to be produced in a way that's sustainable and ensures a supply of healthy foods today and the future. We see high supports for people saying that we should incentivize farmers and ranchers to implement sustainable and resilient agriculture practices. And in fact, also support for ensuring that if farmers do receive subsidies, that they are tied to those sustainable and resilient practices. We see high support, and the 84% in our recent poll found of people said that agriculture policies should be aligned to support the production and consumption of healthier food. We know that, a lot of what we're producing is not necessarily what we're being told to eat on the consumption side of things with the dietary guidelines. So people see that there needs to be better alignment in what we're producing and what people need for a healthy diet. We also see high support for protections for meatpacking workers, for example. 88% of people favor additional protections for meatpacking workers. 82% say that we should hold corporate integrators responsible for the pollution and other harms caused by concentrated animal feeding operations. So we see high support across political lines for a lot of these issues. And we also had a poll in our poll in the Farm Bill poll in 2023. We asked people about, do you support increasing support for small and mid-sized farmers? And people largely do support that. But when it came to, giving more funding to corporate agribusiness, that was where a lot of people drew the line on that. We also asked, who do you blame for kind of inflation and rising costs? And we're seeing kind of an increase in the amount of people who are blaming corporations and corporate greed more than other factors. In 2023, we asked a question around, what do you think are the top reasons for inflation, with a few different options. And we found 46% said corporations were one of the top two reasons. But then there was another poll that just came out recently that was done by someone else, but they asked an almost identical question. And it was 61% of respondents blamed corporate greed. So it went up from 46 to 61 in about a year in two different polls. So I thought that was interesting. And so I think, to me, that's encouraging that, we're not so divided that we can't make progress on these issues.
With the Farm Bill, does what you've learned, and does it influence how the Farm Bill will be written, do you think? I mean, does it change it?
I don't think we've had success in changing it yet. I think one of my favorite things to read about the Farm Bill is Marion Nessel has a article from Politico in 2016 that the headline is "The Farm Bill Drove Me Insane." And she talks about how she tried to teach a course on the Farm Bill and was just so frustrated at how purposefully complicated it is.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of her points, is people need to understand this, but it's kind of purposefully so obtuse that even the people who are working on it typically only understand, small portions of it.
Right.
Because it's just way too much for anyone to kind of humanly really have a, deep knowledge on all the parts of it. So that's, I think, a problem that we don't have better understanding and recognition of just how important the Farm Bill is to a lot of our food and agriculture systems.
Well, and I think there's a lot of people that aren't even really aware of the Farm Bill, which is a big problem. We need people to know about it.
We asked that in our poll in 2023. Have you read or heard anything about the Farm Bill? And 80% of people said no.
Okay, then we should stop right now. Will you tell us what the Farm Bill is for people who aren't aware of it?
The Farm Bill is a huge piece of legislation that is passed every 5 years or so. Congress isn't always great about keeping to their deadlines of passing it every 5 years. But it funds a lot of really important programs, including nutrition assistance programs like SNAP. It also supplies funding for and subsidies for farmers across the country, crop insurance, conservation programs. There's about 12 or so titles, and it's huge expenditures, and really helps dictate really how our food is grown and what crops are prioritized in the country.
And why does it get stuck so often? This last one was supposed to pass when? 2023?
It was supposed to pass in 2023, and they did a 1-year extension, and they're looking like they're going to be doing another 1-year extension now.
Is it just because people can't agree on things?
I think, part of it is it's very big and complicated, and the Farm Bill has relied on these different coalitions to come together and support it. So because the Farm Bill marries the nutrition assistance programs and the kind of farmer support programs, you need people on both sides. You need the kind of it's kind of pulled together a coalition of, this is oversimplifying, but the urban Democrats who care about nutrition assistance programs, and then the rural conservatives and moderates who care mostly about the farm programs. And so you kind of need both of them to pass this big piece of legislation. And so that's kind of how it's held together, and how in some ways it kind of continues eking through and not changing as much as some might want it to, because you kind of need these both sides to agree not to mess it up too bad, and then we can kind of keep going as we have it with the nutrition assistance programs and the farm programs.
When you go out and do a farm bill poll, right, what's the intention behind it? What's the purpose?
The purpose is to help inform policymakers with what people know and care about and prioritize that relates to what's in the farm bill. So, for example, we asked about, do people think that we should be incentivizing farmers and ranchers to implement sustainable and resilient agriculture practices? So we know that there's some great conservation programs that are part of the farm bill. In many cases, they're oversubscribed. There's more people that want to be part of these conservation programs than we have room for. And so that's part of it, just showing that there's alignment and support for increasing these programs and allowing more farmers who want to be part of these programs to benefit. So it's kind of taking a pulse of where people are, what people know about it, what people support, and then depending on the findings, kind of using that to show to policymakers and say, hey, look, these things are important and you should consider these when you're working on farm bill elements.
With this poll, were you surprised by the results?
I think I was pleasantly surprised by just how much support there was for some of these elements I've been talking about, and how, it didn't, across the board, there was high support for protections for workers and for support for these conservation programs, et cetera.
I asked because I was really surprised. Not that I thought people would say like, no, I'm totally against worker safety improvements and that sort of thing. It's just, I'm surprised that as many people care, because that's what's missing from the bigger conversation, I think, is how many people in this country really care about all of these issues in our food system. And how important, of course they're important. If you care, they're important. But they're important to the majority of people from these polls.
Part of why we do these polls, too, is to just help raise the awareness of that and let people know where people stand on these issues, where we see trends over time and moving one direction or another. But we do see, over time, people are increasingly caring about these issues and where their food comes from, and recognizing the linkages to their own health in terms of how we grow food. So I think that's encouraging, and it's an important part of the political process, I think, to kind of include these type of political polls in our work. That's why we keep doing them.
But this doesn't really affect what they purchase, these kind of results.
We don't ask a lot of questions about what they're buying and what they're consuming. I think there's some other efforts and other studies that do that. This is really more kind of opinions and beliefs about the food system. We're careful not to read in too much to some things that, have social desirability. People might want to say, oh, I think it sounds good to say that they care about these things. So, we do kind of factor that into how we ask the questions and how we interpret their results.
Give me an example.
Sometimes we'll ask, things like, how much do you think about climate change, for example, when you're buying your food? And the answers might be a lot, a little, or don't think about it at all. So if people say, if like 50% of people say they think about it a little bit, I don't really put too much stock in the people that say they think about it a little bit. I'm looking more at the people that say they think about it a lot, because I think that tells you a little bit more about that. Because I think it's so easy if you're one of these people filling out a poll, say, oh yeah, sure, I think about that a little bit. That's one example of just careful interpretation of what the data means.
Well, and also thinking about it a little bit probably isn't influencing what you buy, whereas thinking about it a lot probably is.
And I think in terms of what people say they care about the most when they're buying food costs are top of mind. And I don't think that's going to surprise anyone. I think that when people are asked to, rank what's most important to them, it's really cost, taste, and health are really the top factors. And when you get to things like climate change or sustainability, they're not as immediate top of mind for people. And so we shouldn't expect that if we're messaging or framing totally around climate, it's going to be impactful for the majority of people. I do think that's not to say people aren't concerned about climate change threats, but that falls lower in that kind of immediacy, I think, for people when they're buying food.
It's also very new in the climate conversations to actually talk about the food system. It's been left out for so long. And it's such a major contributor. It's recent that those conversations are really happening. And so that probably plays a role too. Even in media, it's new.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do some media content analysis about that to just see how much of the climate change coverage is really talking about food.
In 2023, I think Sentient Media did an analysis of all the major news stories from all the major publications on climate articles and how much food systems were mentioned. And it was 7%.
It's interesting because I was just looking at a couple of polls that were done by others that talked about people's views on climate change and what they thought, how much they thought climate change was going to affect their life. And one recent poll found that 77% of Americans expected climate change to have a great deal or moderate impact on the cost of food. So people do think that it's going to affect the cost of their food. But we see much smaller portions of people saying that it's a top priority for when they're buying food. I mean, in another recent poll by NORC AP, they found it's, about a third of people might say that animal welfare or the environment are very important in their food purchasing.
And I do think there is much more of awareness that like climate change is going to affect food, but people don't think of food affecting climate in the same numbers because the media has not done a good job for a lot of reasons at getting that out there. I think it's getting better.
Right. And I think, it does present an opportunity to think about how do we frame climate issues in ways that really resonate with what people say they care about more, which, in other research, we see people care about, their health, they care about food safety and other topics like that. Climate change does have impacts, obviously, on the health of the food that we're eating, the availability of food that we're eating, pandemic risks, other food safety issues from, the ways we're producing food. And so I think that some of what we can do is like better explain how just some of these broader big systemic issues that sometimes are difficult to explain really do make an impact on health and food safety, things that are more proximal to people when they are making their decisions. And we are in the midst of analyzing a new poll that we'll have coming out in the coming months.
What's that? The new poll?
That one is focused a bit more on what people think about how meat is produced and perceptions of meat production and what concerns they have around concentrated animal feeding operations.
Oh, you got to tell me more.
The thing is, I can't talk too much about that one because we need to get it published first.
I'm interested in what people really, I guess you guys are too, right? But what people really know about all this.
Right. And I'm also interested in understanding, do people even want to know about some of these issues? Because I think some of the meat production concerns, it's kind of like people would rather, in some cases, I think some people might not really want to know all the nitty gritty. They don't want to know how the sausage is made. That poses an interesting question and challenge about how you communicate about some of these issues when maybe there's a resistance among a subset of people who don't want to know more.
I'm not going to ask you any specific questions about this poll because you can't say them, but with a poll like this, not this poll, but a poll like this, what happens with that kind of information? Like what people know about meat production?
Part of what we're trying to do is also help people who are communicating about these issues understand what resonates with folks. And in particular, are there different types of people, different audience types where certain messages might resonate more? So the climate message might resonate with some folks more so than others. And how do we frame our messaging around that? So I think that's one key goal of this new work is to not only share broadly kind of what people think and know about the production of meat, but provide some more communication implications for people and groups who are doing this work and communicating on these topics so that they can hopefully be more effective in how they are doing so.
That makes sense. I'm dying to see this poll. I'm just so curious.
I know. We could do we could do an update too when it comes out.
Go back for a second to taste, cost, and health are the three things that people really care about the most when they choose what to eat or choose what to buy. Is it always been that, or did it used to be price, convenience, taste? I know people care about health in terms of not getting listeria, right? But is that becoming more of a concern? Is actual people's health in general, not like anything bad that is in the food, but your actual physical health on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, in some of the more recent polls I've looked at, the convenience factor has kind of gone down. Like that's not really one of the top factors. I think, in some other polls I've seen too, there's been a question around like, are you eating less meat than you used to? And when people say yes to that question, and then they're asked, well, why are you eating less meat than you used to? Health is really the top reason that people cite. So, that may be, they experienced a health issue and are trying to change their diet, or maybe they're being proactive. So we don't know all those details necessarily, but we do know that when people say they're eating less meat, the majority are saying that they're doing that for health reasons.
That's a positive, though, that message is really like getting out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's always interesting to me because there's so many people whose lives have been completely saved by changing their diet.
Mm-hmm.
And I always feel like there's not enough talk about that just in the general zeitgeist.
Yeah. I was at a conference a couple months ago and had a physician come up to me and say, I'm talking to my patients all the time. I'm trying to give them resources on changing their diet. What should I tell them? Because it's so hard to get them to change their diet and move away from some of this. But it does seem like when people do change their diets, it's motivated by health. I think some of what's hard to overcome, and then we can think about, changing our messaging on, is this deprivation mindset of, you have to not do this, or you have to take this out. Psychologically, people don't like that.
No.
And so kind of reframing that messaging to, what you can have and what you'll gain when you do change your diet for the better.
And I'm sure people respond much better to what they can have.
I think it's really fascinating, just psychologically, how you motivate people on those things. And behavior change is really tough, and we know that having the information does not mean people change their behaviors.
No. What excites me the most about a lot of your findings are that these are real things people really care about, that people across the board really want a healthy, sustainable, non-corporate run, huge CAFO-ridden food system, but want a much better one.
Yeah, it sounds kind of basic, but yeah, that is what people want. And I think people largely are kind of becoming more aware to this disconnect between what this vision that we pretty much all want and what we actually have. And so I think that's where we can gain some traction and make change.
To learn more about Patti, to learn more about Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, go to our website, speciesunite.com. We will have links to everything. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Species Unite. If you have a spare moment and could do us a favor, please subscribe, rate, review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Really helps people find the show. I would like to thank everyone at Species Unite, including Gary Knutson, Caitlin Pierce, Amy Jones, Paul Healy, Santina Polky-Link, Hannah Gabrielson, Lorraine Docherty, and Anna Kolner, who wrote and performed today's music. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.